You are holding a phone right now. On it are 2,000 photos, your daughter's first steps, your father's last birthday, the morning you got the keys to the apartment you can barely afford. Those photos are not on your phone. They are on a server you have never seen, in a building you will never visit, owned by a company that can change the terms of access at any time without notifying you. 2.1 trillion photos were taken worldwide last year, 5.3 billion per day, 61,400 per second. 14.3 trillion exist in total, 94% captured on smartphones. The average user has roughly 2,000 photos on their device, and almost none of them are owned by the person who pressed the shutter. They are stored on cloud servers operated by Apple, Google, and Amazon. Corporations that can restructure access, reprice storage, or delete inactive accounts whenever the quarterly report demands it. In the subscription trap, we mapped how Canada became a nation of renters. You rent your home, you rent your car, you rent your software. But this is the sequel nobody asked for, because you also rent your memories. You rent your music, you rent your movies. And when the payment stops, or the platform folds, or the company decides to restructure for a tax benefit, the file does not downgrade. It disappears. The father of the internet has a name for this. Vint Cerf, vice president of Google, calls it the digital dark age. His warning is blunt. Future generations will not be able to learn about our lives. Not because we did not document them, because we documented them on systems designed to forget. This is the memory hole. And by the time we are done, you will understand that the most recorded civilization in human history is building the most erasable archive ever created. 1. The buy button lie. Start with the word on the screen, buy. You have seen it 10,000 times. On iTunes, on the PlayStation Store, on Amazon Prime Video, on Google Play. The button says buy. The contract says license. In September 2024, California became the first jurisdiction in North America to call this what it is, false advertising. Assembly Bill 2426 now requires any platform selling digital goods to disclose that the consumer is purchasing a license, not ownership. The bill was introduced after a pattern of revocations so brazen that lawmakers had no choice. In April 2024, Ubisoft revoked access to its video game The Crew, not delisted, revoked. Players who had paid full price can no longer open the product they bought. The servers shut down and the licenses died with them. The backlash was severe enough to launch a European consumer movement called Stop Killing Games, which gathered over 1 million signatures, enough to force consideration by EU lawmakers. The industry has not complied. That same year, Sony threatened to pull Discovery content from PlayStation libraries, shows that users had already purchased through the storefront. In Germany and Austria, Sony permanently revoked access to hundreds of purchased movies with no refund. By early 2025, 83% of PlayStation game sales were digital downloads. The physical disc is dying, and with it, the last format that cannot be revoked remotely. Amazon's terms of service contain a sentence so quiet it functions like a trapdoor. You do not acquire ownership of the digital content, you acquire a license. And that license can be revoked if Amazon or the content provider decides to remove it from your library. The button still says, buy. Here is the line that should keep you awake. The buy button is not just misleading. The entire digital storefront is rigged. You did not stop owning things by choice. You were tricked into confusing a license with a deed. The longest unread contract in human history, the terms of service, stripped the middle class of the right to own its own culture. Tell me in the comments, what is something you paid for digitally that you can no longer access? A game? A movie? A song? I want to hear what disappeared. 2. The streaming erasure. If the buy button is the trapdoor, then the streaming model is the room with no floor. 46% of Canadian households had no cable subscription by the end of 2024. Streaming subscription revenue in Canada climbed 15% year over year to $4.2 billion. Canadians now subscribe to an average of 2.6 streaming platforms, paying roughly 8% more than they did the year before. They are spending more, and they are owning less. But the real erosion is not on the consumer side. It is on the supply side. Warner Bros. Discovery wrote off between $2.8 and $3.5 billion in content following its merger. Shows that had already been produced, already released, were pulled from HBO Max and deleted. Not canceled, erased. Westworld, The Nevers, Sesame Street spin-offs. Original Films audiences were actively watching. Why? Because deleting content you have already paid to produce allows you to claim a tax write-off on the impairment. The content is worth more dead than alive. Disney followed. Originals like Willow and the mysterious Benedict Society were removed from Disney+. The company recorded $3.84 billion in restructuring and content impairment charges in 2023 alone. This is the mechanism. The show is not disappearing because nobody watched it. The show is disappearing because an accountant found more value in its absence. The tax write-offs distort the true value of the culture being deleted. Culture is not being lost. It is being liquidated. The streaming platforms told you the library was the product, but the library was never yours. It is a rotating inventory managed by margin, not memory. And in the Potemkin economy, we showed how Canada measures GDP growth through activity that produces nothing durable. Streaming revenue counts as economic output. The content it pays for can be deleted the following quarter for a tax benefit. The economy grows. The culture shrinks. The ledger does not distinguish between the two. 3. The digital graveyard. The company that warned you about the digital dark age is also the company most aggressively building it. Google has killed more than 290 products and services since its founding. Google+, Google Reader, Google Play Music, Google Podcasts, Google Hangouts, Stadia, Chromecast. Each one required users to invest time, build libraries, create communities, and store data on Google's servers. Each one was shut down when the unit stopped justifying its cost. In 2024 alone, Google killed Chromecast, Google Podcasts, Dropcam, Google VPN, Jamboard, and Keen. Users were told to migrate. Some data transferred, some did not. The pattern is so consistent that an open source project called Killed by Google now operates as a memorial, a graveyard for the services people trusted with their digital lives. Now pull the lens to Canada. 41 billion hours were spent online by Canadians in 2024. Streaming subscription revenue hit $4.2 billion. Cable revenue fell to $6.5 billion and is dropping at 3% per year. Nearly a third of Canadians canceled a streaming service to save money, but the ones who stayed paid more for access to a library that shrinks when the spreadsheet demands it. And all of it runs through the same 3 pipes: Bell, Rogers, Telus. The Canadian consumer continues to hemorrhage cash to the telecom oligopoly for the privilege of accessing a rented library through a rented connection. The oligopoly does not create your content. It does not store your memories. It charges you to access a rented library through a rented connection at a price it sets without competition. It is a drain on every household that pays for the privilege of accessing its own digital life. In the subscription trap, we call this the oligopoly tax. It has not changed. It has expanded. The companies exploit the fact that you have no alternative. You are not paying for the internet. You are paying for the right to temporarily access things that do not belong to you, through infrastructure that does not compete, at a price you cannot negotiate. Tell me in the comments, how many streaming services have you canceled in the last year, and what did you lose when you did? 4. The digital dark age. A Viking carved a rune into stone 1100 years ago. You can still read it today. A Canadian saved a photo to a floppy disk 30 years ago. The file is gone. The disk is gone. The software that reads it is gone. Vint Cerf calls it bit rot. The depletion of our physical archives was supposed to be solved by digitization. Instead, the phenomenon where files become unreadable, not because the data degrades, but because the software needed to open them no longer exists. And backwards compatibility, the assumption that newer tools will always read older files, is not guaranteed. It never was. This is not hypothetical. NASA lost early space mission records because the magnetic tape formats became obsolete before anyone archived the data in a modern format. The progression is visible in any Canadian basement. VHS tapes with no player, CDs with no drive, floppy disks with no reader, and now cloud accounts with no password. Each generation of storage was marketed as more durable than the last. Each one became obsolete faster. The physical formats lasted decades before replacement. Cloud services restructure their pricing annually. The shelf life of your access is now measured in billing cycles, not years. This is not an accident of progress. It is a business model. The industry stopped giving you floppy disks, CDs, and external hard drives because physical storage is a one-time purchase. You buy it once, the company earns once. Cloud storage is a yield farm. You pay every month for the rest of your life to access files that sit on hardware you will never touch. Apple charges for iCloud tiers, Google charges for Google One, Amazon charges for Prime storage. The model is identical. Replace the thing you own with a service you rent and extract monthly revenue from the access. The hardware was not made obsolete by innovation. It was made obsolete by accounting. The floppy disk did not fail. It was unprofitable. Every gigabyte you store in the cloud is a perpetual invoice disguised as convenience. The average smartphone user has roughly 2,000 photos on their device. Most are synced to iCloud or Google Photos. Cloud systems where the consumer pays monthly for access to their own memories. One lapsed payment, one breached account, one company restructuring its storage pricing, and the archive enters freefall. Your photos become phantom files, technically existing on a server somewhere, functionally inaccessible to you. Ghost data in a system that only recognizes paying customers. 70% of all computer users have experienced data loss at least once. 34% of those losses come from accidental deletion, another 30% from hardware failure. These are not edge cases, they are the default experience. Every civilization is defined by what it leaves behind. The Egyptians left tombs, the Romans left roads. The Canadians of the 21st century will leave behind terms of service agreements and expired cloud subscriptions. We have more data than any civilization in history and will leave behind less evidence of our existence than a culture that carved into rock with a chisel. 5. The death trap. In the inheritance trap, we mapped how the trillion-dollar wealth transfer is being consumed by reverse mortgages, long-term care costs, and the tax mechanism that treats your RRSP as income the moment you die. But the inheritance crisis is not only financial, it is historical. Because when a person dies in 2026, their digital life dies with them. Apple requires a court order to transfer a deceased person's Apple ID. If the phone is locked with a passcode, Apple cannot and will not unlock it. The photos, the messages, the voice memos, the notes, all of it sealed behind encryption that was designed to protect the living and now imprisons the memory of the dead. Google will delete an inactive account after 2 years of no activity. Apple and Google keep your digital estate on a corporate leash, accessible only on their terms, through their process, at their discretion. The feature is called Inactive Account Manager. If the deceased did not configure it, and most did not, then every email, every photo in Google Photos, every document in Google Drive enters a countdown. 2 years of silence, then gone. Facebook will memorialize an account or delete it at the request of a verified family member. But accessing the content, the messages, the albums, the posts that constitute a digital life, requires a process that most grieving families never complete. And then there is Quadriga CX, a Canadian story. The cryptocurrency exchange headquartered in Vancouver whose founder died in 2019 while traveling in India. He was the sole holder of the private keys. 26,350 Bitcoin became permanently inaccessible. The Ontario Securities Commission investigated. The exchange collapsed. The money was gone, not stolen by a hacker, not seized by a government, erased by the death of one person who held one password. That is one story. Globally, an estimated 3 to 4 million Bitcoin, between 11 and 18% of the total supply that will ever exist, are permanently lost due to forgotten passwords, destroyed hardware, and deaths without estate plans. Your grandmother had a photo album on the shelf. Your mother had a shoebox of prints in the closet. You have an iCloud account that requires a court order, a death certificate, and a probate lawyer to open. And even then, Apple will not give your children the passcode. The boomers pass down physical deeds. The millennials will pass down login screens that lock the moment the credit card expires. 6. The verdict. Elbows up. So here is the ledger. The buy button is a lie. The law now confirms it. Your streaming library is a rotating tax write-off managed for shareholder value, not cultural preservation. The company that named the digital dark age has killed more of its own products than any other corporation in history. The hardware that stores your life is degrading faster than the memories it holds, and the people you love will not be able to access your digital estate without a lawyer and a judge. This is not a glitch. This is the business model. The Terms of Service is the longest unread contract in human history. It is the document that transferred ownership of your music, your movies, your photos, your games, and your memories, from you to a server farm that answers to a quarterly earnings call. Every click of I agree was a signature on a deed you never read, transferring an asset you did not know you were giving away. In the subscription trap, we showed how Canada became a country that rents everything. The memory hole is what happens when the lease expires. The music stops playing. The movie vanishes from your library. The photo album locks behind a password that died with the person who created it. The culture gets written off for a tax benefit. A country that tells its people to store their lives in the cloud while the cloud answers to a balance sheet is not preserving memory. It is managing its deletion. It is the same managed decline we have mapped across housing, healthcare, wages, and wealth. The mechanism does not care what it erodes. It erodes whatever is not nailed down. And in the digital economy, nothing is nailed down. Everything floats on a server. Everything depends on a subscription. Everything disappears the moment it stops generating yield. The data is not disappearing by accident. It is disappearing by design, by accounting, by terms of service, by the quiet, corrosive logic that says your memories are only worth hosting as long as they generate revenue. This is the memory hole, and nobody is coming to fill it. Drop a like so more people see it. Subscribe for the economic truths nobody else will say out loud. Tell me in the comments, if your phone died right now and you cannot recover it, what would you lose forever? I am Hawk, and I will see you in the next one.